For some reason, my camera doesn't work on this, so you can't see me, but you can see my slides. So, imagine, if you will, you are the new instructional designer at a business school, and you just started. One of the first things you do is you get to join the Christmas do. And you walk up to a group of academics, and one of the academics, tall, super confident, blonde in heels, head of marketing, says, "And what do you do?" And you say, "Well, I am here to help you develop your distance learning courses. And so we'll be taking some of the courses you do face-to-face or programming, and doing them online." And they say to you, "And what do you say?" "Well, I was flabbergasted. I had nothing to say." It's a very difficult question to answer. As you know, there's a long answer to it, however. First of all, I guess it's worth saying that the business of debating the role of technology in education is extremely old. People have been talking about whether certain technologies assist education since at least Socrates, one can read that books were not helpful to education in Plato's Phaedrus. And it's not a meaningless question, as one person on Twitter once informed me. We may have to choose whether to ourselves produce it for others or actually pursue it for ourselves. It's a human decision that learners and teachers have to make. And technologists are, in various forms, are responsible for promoting what is good about it, avoiding what is bad about it, and trying to improve what can be improved. So, first up, is the perspective, probably the predominant perspective, which is that tech doesn't change learning. Tech actually doesn't matter. And the most well-known proponent of this is Richard Clarke, who argues that media makes no difference. And this is most famously put in his paper, Reconsidering Research on Learning from Media, in which he reviews 50 years of media comparison studies, where the media comparison studies being where the studies are one mode of teaching and is compared with another mode in a controlled environment, typically. And reviewing this huge body and well-established body of research, Clarke finds that these studies suffer two confounds. First, these studies have confounds from the teaching method, right? So, which he usually finds to have a 0.2 added effect size. And this disappears once you use the same teacher in the comparison. So have the same teacher for the face-to-face, another one for the videos, you get the same result. And then second, there are confounds from novelty. So people get excited about something because it's new. And this has a 0.36 to 0.1 added effect size. And this disappears when you lengthen the study. So after the novelty wears off, it goes down to the same. And if you add up these two effect sizes and the confounds from them, you get no significant difference between the media studies. From this paper, Clarke makes three arguments, and they're worth presenting separately. First, media comparison studies do not show any difference in learning. Second, researchers should stop doing media comparison studies because they're fruitless and they just find something over and over again. And third, the choice of delivery medium does not make any significant difference to learning. And out of this comes his most famous quote, which is that the best current evidence is that media are mere vehicles that deliver instruction but do not influence student achievement any more than the truck that delivers our groceries causes changes in our nutrition. So many of you have heard this quote bandied about. Apparently, it was not from Clarke himself, but from a student, and the Clarke thought it was so good he had to use it, and the quote is taken on a life of its own. The second perspective is that tech can change learning if we let it. And this is from Robert Cosma, who has an aside, I don't know, maybe looks a bit like Leonard. I don't know. Just to like, the two of them. Yeah. And he says, think about capabilities. So, and his paper is called Will Media Influence Learning, Reframing the Debate. And here he rejects this sort of method-medium distinction. And so he uses two examples, one called Thinker Tools, which was a computer lesson in physics. The exercises increase in complexity, sort of a scaffolding exercise. So first it starts with horizontal motion, then vertical, then continuous, and then friction and gravity, and as you might guess, it has a form control. And the second group is called the Jasper Woodbury series. There, a video disc presents videos with multimedia kind of versions of mathematical story problems. The students would then get together, face-to-face working groups to solve the problem with the teacher's help and instruction, and as you guess, outperform the control group. So his kind of rousing conclusion is that educational technology is a design science, not a natural science. The phenomena we study are the products of our own conceptions and devices. If there is no relationship between media and learning, it may be because we have not made one yet, or not yet made one. So here and I summarize the video. First, Clark is saying the medium delivers a teaching delivery truck. Cosma is saying the medium may deliver some kinds of new teaching, which we must find. Clark responds to this and he's like, listen, Cosma, anything one medium can do can be done with another. Media are substitute. But more importantly, the mechanism we seek to describe as ed researchers does not fundamentally belong to the medium. Okay? Ultimately, this is what he's turning back. Learning happens in the mind. So who is right? Well, Clark wasn't all wrong. Learning is in the mind. I take that to be true. And pedagogical effects are not medium relative. So the one person in the room, who I won't name, pulled some people up on the use of the term digital pedagogy, and people kind of backtracked on it and were like, well, okay, yeah, maybe there's digital pedagogy as such, pedagogy is pedagogy. I think they were quite right to step back. So, something like retrieval practice is retrieval practice. The effects of retrieval practice are the effects of retrieval practice, whether it's done with a flashcard, with another person, or online. And there's no reason to think that the delivery mechanism is that important. Media comparison studies are frivolous, or so it seems in the majority of cases. And researchers should stop doing it. Now, this has a long and interesting legacy. Some people are the children of Clark, even though they don't know it. This is a recent paper that's really interesting, and I recommend you read, called "The Research We Have Is Not the Research We Need." And Thomas Reeves is calling for the research that essentially is going to help us deliver better teaching. And part of what he's calling for people to stop, echoing Clark, is stop doing media comparison studies. It's very easy for people to do media comparison studies. That's why there's so many of them. But they don't help us. What we need is people trying different things besides switching out delivery modes. Another key moment in the Children of Clark was this presentation by Dave White and Donna Langcliffe, where they presented this pyramid model of digital literacy, where they kind of said, hey, okay, we know that technology is very important, blah, blah, blah. But this stuff on the top, the pedagogy and becoming, and this is where the real action is. This is when we need to start talking about. And you could argue it felt like punching around at the time, or that maybe it was a kind of a reenactment of some of the values in higher education that we as educational technologists should actually be questioning. But yeah, I don't want to say that. Another child of Clark is this cute guy here. Does anybody know who this is?
Red panda.
It's a red panda.
Eric the red panda.
This is, I'm referring specifically to the Twitter account, the Pedagogy Panda, which is an account on Twitter who puts out memes like this about trying to remind us all to refer back to the pedagogy, often invoking this dichotomy between technology and pedagogy. So I think Clark and the pedagogy panda could get along. And I made some jokes about the pedagogy panda a few years ago on Twitter, and I think most people agreed, but some people got mad. So as you do.
They are one of the most aggressive animals in the animal kingdom. Really? So you do not want to, upset a red panda.
Okay, well that's good to know. I mean, when I look at it, it doesn't even really look like a panda, to be fair. But but
it doesn't look aggressive.
Yeah, I'm also like one of these people who don't like the difference between turtles and tortoises. It's like, why do people even do that? But and then like my wife is like, they're completely different. So anyway. Clark wins over a lot of people. If you say at a conference, hey, we're not led by the technology, you're sure to get like a round of applause from people. So Clark has his virtues, but Cosmo wasn't all wrong either. And I think that the main maybe point about Cosmo I want to emphasize is that when we adopt new technologies, we do tend to perceive their affordances in terms of our existing practices. So we carry over our practices to the new media. So to give you an example, the acting style of early cinema was based on the style formed from theater. So you look at early movies, there's a lot of kind of really what we would consider overacting. Doing this kind of stuff that, in theater might make sense, but in cinema, it took people a while to realize they didn't need to do. Here's another example, Greek columns. Does anyone know where the form of Greek columns, as we know them in stone, was it what it was inspired by?
Like wooden columns.
Exactly, they were just big wooden logs, shaped out. And so the reason, even though, for centuries, English architects have gone on grand tours to look at this, wonderful design, it was just an imitation of the timber construction, which we don't have anymore because the timber disintegrated. So really it's just carrying on, as Marshall McLuhan famously formulated, he said that the content or the form of the old medium becomes the content of the next medium. So there is something to that. But anyway, Clark wasn't all right. And this is what I want to get to. It doesn't address what happens in live in situ environments. And this is why some people would argue that his paper is virtually unpublishable now. It doesn't address what to do with technology in real life. So he, for example, was told by a dean at Harvard that this dean had read his paper and had decided not to pay for a computer lab. And Clark was like, that's not what I meant at all. But what did he mean? It's not totally clear. It doesn't address how context influences learning outcomes. And what students, tools, and educators on the ground actually do. It doesn't address either the problem of agency. So I'm just going to try to go through these really quickly. First is the problem of context. So this is from a book by Alan Cooper called About Face. It's a major tome in UX. So UX is made of the user, the system, and the context. This is what UX is. So they have a kind of basic model of that. And this could be made of the who, what, where, and I'll just go through this, like some examples of what this could be for us. Now, the other thing is what we consider a kind of problem of agency. And when we look at real materials, they tend to challenge our concepts of power and agency. So if you think about something like Scrabble letters, And when people play Scrabble, they'll put them on the board, they'll shuffle them around. And there's something in that moment where there's a kind of ambiguity, like, is that physicality of shuffling the Scrabble letters around doing some of the thinking for you, or is all the thinking really in the mind? When you think about something like a house key, you know, is the power of the house key really like in the key, or is it in the lock, or is it a combination of the two, or in the relationship between the two? Also, Bruno Latour, you know, famously, you know, had fun talking about speed bumps, and somehow, in a way, we've outsourced our moral consciousness, that we don't want to drive quickly in residential neighborhoods. We've outsourced that morality to the speed bump itself. And so this idea that sort of objects are passive and they don't have agency, we do, doesn't really work out that way in real life. So 3 kind of challenging ways to consider agency is first, as a network of human, non-human actors. So actor network theory sees agency as not something that individual people have, but something that comes, that anything can have, human or non-human, as a result of a relationship within a network. Second, sociomaterial entanglement, in which the socio and material are basically mutually constituting and can't be separated. So what is human and what is non-human is essentially not a meaningful distinction anymore. And then thirdly, sociomaterial imbrication. And here the social and the material, the human and the non-human, can interlock, but then can unlock. And sort of what we experience in the kind of changes of practices and technologies in that sort of interplay of locking and unlocking. So, and here's a warning, these are sociological theories, they're not pedagogical theories. So you have to be dangerous not to misuse terms. So talking about actor network theory, learning in Clark's seeming model would be very linear. You have a teacher as a content with a pedagogy, delivers it in a mode of delivery to the learner. Whereas for, you know, an actor network theory, there's this complex network of possible causes, which are, you know, enabling, disabling things, acting on behalf of others, and so forth. And you know, exposing a much more complex reality. In sociomaterial entanglement, you have these elements, but for one or like Houx, these are really the same. They're one thing, and they're whereas for actor network theory is very much methodological. It's about a way to do things. This is ontological. She's saying down to the very atoms, there's no difference. So for Wanda Lekowski, she looks at, for example, what this in practice looks like is, you know, she looked at professional hotel reviews like Firmers or AA, and they were put out of business by TripAdvisor, you know, these online review websites. And why it happened was that basically there's a combination of technology and practices created a new assemblage, this new entanglement of practices and values. So what Clark might see is like this, but what Orlikowski might see is something like that. It's just one thing. Lastly, there's sociomaterial implication, whereas in the socio and the material overlap, but not completely. And this is, I think, probably the first person to talk about this is a Norwegian scholar, Tone Bradetee. It's based on the metaphor, imbrication is based on the metaphor of ancient Roman tiles with these two parts that interlock, the imbrex and the tegula. And one of the ways that one of their first studies Bradetee did with Verne was on do-yourself taxes in Norway, where you know you have something like this, the doing of taxes, which is a loosely defined task for citizens. And then there's some kind of a computer service for it that's automated, but it doesn't cover the task completely. and residual tasks are left over for the citizen. So they might change the automation, and it covers something, but then as a result, it creates new tasks. But the point is that for this design to happen, we can't be completely entangled, because we need to be able to take a step back and say, actually, this works, it doesn't work, etc. Another way to visualize this is by Paul Leonard, where it's this movement of human agency, human practices, and then material agency, material practices. So people do things for a bit, they fix the tool, they work with it a bit more. And so it starts with perceptions of affordance, and then it ends with perceptions of constraint, which then leads to changes in the technology. So it's driven by a concept of affordance, and so which humans have. Humans can have a concept of affordance, but technology can't. This is a more developed way that people diagram imbrication. I won't talk it out, but it's too complicated, but it's a kind of a richer picture. So what are some advantages and disadvantages of these? Okay, actor network theory is good, that it gets, a kind of a richer picture of the relationship between actors and takes human agency within its fault. What's bad, it flattens out these agencies between human and non-human by methodology. Sociomaterial similarly looks at technological change in richer ways, but again, it flattens out these agencies. And so we know we need to take materials more seriously, but to say that they're the same as human or there's no difference is slightly sending your brain off on a rocket ship. And then second, it can't explain how these assemblages disentangle. So the sociomaterial implication is a lot more promising. It looks at tech, gets us to look at the things, but it shows the difference between the human and the material and explains sociomaterial change. Where does pedagogy fit into all this? Well, it fits outside, and it informs how people learn. So contrary to a paper that you might have seen, pedagogy is not entangled. Pedagogy, like at least, I mean, it can be influenced by material practices, but how people learn is a fundamental psychological reality. It's not a sociological reality. Another way to think about this, I try to create a map of this, is, a kind of here, human agency, the purple bit is a kind of movement, and then the material agency can be mapped like this, where the inside bit is the perception of affordance, the outside is the perception of constraint. For this upper northeast bit are the kind of unintended consequences, and then the bottom bit is outmoded functionality. And then this bottom purple bit is like a continuation of new practices, like the Marshall McLuhan phenomenon we were talking about. So nearly done. Is learning separable from technology? Well, no. In practice, human agency and material agency can be difficult to separate. It's true. Our perceptions of teaching are often shaped by the technology we use. And when we get used to using a tool, it becomes transparent, as Heidegger famously described it. But at the same time, also, yes, it is separable. The cognitive definition of learning works perfectly well, as far as I can tell. And we can all step away from our tools and imagine things other ways. So, the Greeks, for example, when they did pottery, they copied metal construction, they copied basketry, but it's clear that they were just doing it actually for fun, not because they were carrying over old practices. It was just playfulness. If we're able to design things differently, we need to be able to separate the two. Obviously, we can do that. And then when tools do fail us, in the opposite kind of phenomenon that Heidegger described, we become painfully aware of them. So, should we be mad at the Pedagogy Panda? Maybe I was giving it a bit of a hard time. I think maybe the Pedagogy Panda has a point, and we should be kind to the Pedagogy Panda, despite its apparent viciousness.
And in fact,
Maybe.
that it has the smallest digestive tract relative to its body size of any mammal. So it's not without its.
Yeah, so we'll love it from a distance.
Not many people know this.
Not like it until I looked on Wikipedia.
Okay, so anyway, last slide, thanks for bearing with me. 1 year later, I ran into said academic on the train. Turned out she lived pretty close to me. And I saw her and she said, hey, I heard the online courses are going really well. That's true, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, and again, I was left completely speechless. Thank you.
I didn't want to stop you mid-flow, but I
Thank
think
you. Have I gone over time? Only quite a lot.
so. We'll open the floor for questions or comments, and sort of what you'd like to add to the conversation, both from online and also in the room. So I think anyone in the room like to, not about the handout itself, I think we've learned quite a lot about
You have to learn the
There's a lot.
I
was wondering, as you talk about the technologies, I sort of agree with the vast majority of what you were saying. Yeah, but there were a couple of technologies that struck me that seemed to fall outside of the things we were talking about. And there was one where they were training doctors for surgery using electrodes strapped to their hips, and then getting them just to think about controlling something on the screen, which then apparently improved their accuracy and speed actually in the surgery. And the other one was while students were being taught in the conventional environment, they would play white noise in the background. Apparently that improved learning.
Yeah, I mean, in my original presentation, I had a lot of kind of examples. I think there's probably a lot of examples of things like that. And in a way, I think Clark's argument about substitutability becomes like increasingly ridiculous. Like where, you know, maybe Clark would say for the white noise, he's like, well, you could just have a person just going, you know, or like, and it doesn't, there's a lot of other kinds of problems around affordance. Like one of the things is around timing, you know, and technology affords timings that are just otherwise impossible otherwise, you know, and so it's like, in a way you could like play with the delivery truck analogy and say, well, yeah, what if the one delivery truck takes a month and then another one comes like within the hour, you know, even though it's delivering the same thing, is it really the same? You know, what if you're gonna die? Like, what if you die of starvation otherwise, you know? That's a nutritional issue. So there's ways that it will break down, and I think in a funny way, he's reverting to like this kind of fundamental point about what learning really is, and that, you know, we're you know, our goal is always to understand like the mechanisms behind it, and then even if there's only one, it's still relative on like a more conceptual level. So it goes from like being an empirical point that he's making to a character point.
Yes, please.
Stephen, go.
From behind the screen. Just sort of rolling back to the very beginning, is there a significant difference? I think maybe it depends on the scale at which you're looking. I fully accept a lot of the research studies which show there is no significant difference. They tend to be meta studies and they're looking at the picture overall, and that's what I accept. But equally, I have sat through some learning experiences which were truly awful, regardless of whether they were mediated by some technology or not. So when you get down to that micro scale, as you say, there are a great many factors which actually mediate the thing. So yes, at the big scale, there's no significant difference. And if I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be in distance education. But at the micro scale, I think there are differences. And I still adhere to the view that certain technologies have affordances that enable us to do things. So David Bohm has commented live into this session. And without this technology, he couldn't do that. I mean, he'd have to shout really loudly for Milton Keynes to engage with us.
Yeah, and so David Baum says, I expect what really affects learning is not the median, not even what the teacher does, but the activities that students do.
Yeah.
So, but I think that the interesting question to ask is, could the kind of new configuration, like of, doing a distance learning course, when you have a distance learning course, it is really a different kind of configuration. You have a different set of people. You have learning designers. You have new kinds of questions that are asked, new processes.
Hopefully.
Do these things, people studying and working in new environments, could those bring out other kinds of, on the ground, different kinds of pedagogical decisions that would actually lead to people studying more intelligently and designing and delivering in a better way. I guess that's.
But surely there's nothing inherent about face-to-face teaching or distance education, which means one is more rigorously designed than the other. It's just so happens that that's what we've done. We haven't in the past tended to design this sort of teaching thing.
I would argue that it was online because there tends to be more people involved and more planning. And it's more kind of, there's greater visibility in general.
There's been a need to design it more rigorously.
But there's nothing inherently that you
But we should have designed
do it.
face-to-face teaching just as
Absolutely.
rigorously, but we never bothered. We didn't have to.
And I think the other thing is actually that people believe that online doesn't work. They are afraid that it's going to fail. And they interrogate it, they'll say, oh, but how do I know it's going to work? And because they kind of see, they're like somehow missing certain bits of information, they actually work harder to create visibility in their course. Sorry, did you have a question?
No, I was
Okay.
just very much resonating with, we've got a history as a sector of using really poor pedagogy, actually, in terms of didactic instruction. And, I think there's a real forgetting when, with all of this, online doesn't work, where you're like, people were zoning out, people were not talking, people were chatting about something else.
Yep.
That was all happening anyway, in rooms, and has been for years and years and years.
And online, I think, I can't even was hearing a few years ago, this came up, the online subject to a lot more scrutiny than face to face.
Yeah.
We have learning designers here in the academics who say, well, this is brilliant, I've never been taught how to teach before, it's fantastic, and they've been teaching for years, and they'll tell you that, and teaching for years, I know, but they haven't been taught, and they don't, so do go online and everyone poring over it, search, is it better, is it, have a look at, have a look over here first, maybe, And sorry, one thing I just wanted to pick up, maybe it's not a question, it's not a point, and you may have covered it, and I may have just not understood. But we're just learning it. Where does the experience, the context of the learner fit into all this? And in this sort of, because you've got teaching, learning, and then that experience, what they're going through at the time, which I think is where technology is the big difference between two, where you're in control, as you said, the van, the delivery. You don't want to learn if you're doing traditional face-to-face, you're doing it Tuesdays, whether you're in a good mood, bad mood, ill or not, was online, you can switch it to Wednesday, and then that it does affect your learning because you're in a totally different frame of mind.
Yeah, I mean, I probably didn't do a good job with it.
No, you probably did, I probably didn't.
but yeah, I mean, really, I think there's, like two kind of things that are tied up, or where the technology and people are tied up. And then on one side, there's like the teaching side, and then the other side, it's the student side. So I kind of want to avoid the word entangled because it has these connections to Orlikowski in her ontology, but using the word entangled, which I don't think, there's two entanglements. There's like the kind of the teaching side that's entangled with the teaching tools, and then there's the entanglement of study and which is they're both really issues of context, like so the student is tied to the laptop they're using and the the 30 other tabs open and and, their Wi-Fi speed and, whatever, like, childcare policy, and the rest of it. So all those kind of, that sort of configuration of factors, works in a complex way for the student to.
Excellent.
But the end of the story is, yes, it's entangled, but it also risks entanglement, so we're not completely enslaved to it. So anyway, that was me trying to engage with some of the sociological literature on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.